Okay, hello everybody. It is 12 o'clock. It is Tuesday, October 6th. We are live on our continuing Learn to Hunt Deer 2020 webinar series, and we are going to get into it. We got a lot of ground to cover as usual, and we've got some amazing guests that I want people to hear from. So without further ado, I'm going to start the show. All right. Here we go. All right. So the agenda for today's class, really quickly, we're going to go over who we are, who our guests are. We're going to go over some housekeeping items, and then we're going to get into the topics for today. So today is all about picking that one spot that you're going to be setting up on. How close do you set up to that spot, and how do you adjust your tactics as the season progresses? Our guests today, we're also going to spend some time towards the end of the webinar today where they walk through their process, they talk about what they do, and then we're going to get into some questions and answers and hopefully have some responses to folks. Our goal, as always, is for you to learn about deer hunting, the rules and best practices to participate in a safe and ethical deer hunt this fall. And with that said, my name, as always, is James Burnham. I am the Hunting and Angling Recruitment, Retention, and Reactivation Coordinator for the state of Minnesota. Craig? You're muted, buddy.
So my name is Craig Kiger. I'm the shooting sports coordinator for DNR, and I help teach the shooting classes for Learn to Hunt.
Excellent. And then today our guests are Kim Nguyen and Ki Tan, and they are Learn to Hunt mentors. And I'm really stoked that they are here because I love talking with them. I love having them on our hunts, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Kim and Ki.
So I'm Kim, and I started out as an adult hunter. I think I started about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I used to be one of those people I didn't come from a hunting family, didn't know anything about hunting, didn't have any background in hunting. I would consider myself back then a non-hunter that thought that why would anybody be interested in hunting? How ridiculous. But my husband, on the other hand, has hunted pheasants in the past. When I first met him, and then he progressed to attempting big game deer hunting. And I thought to myself, instead of being ignorant about firearms, I should probably learn about firearms. So I started out learning about firearms and just being safe with a firearm being around the house. And then it progressed to learning archery. And from archery, I realized that you could hunt with with a bow and arrow. And I started seeking out, my husband actually seeked out programs that would help me progress into hunting. And that we can both learn together. And so we, 7, 8 years ago, and we had our struggles, made lots of mistakes because we didn't have a mentor when we first started out. So knowing that there's limited resources for adults who want to learn to hunt, we thought that we could help contribute back and let other hunters know that even in your late 30s, you start in your late 30s, you can still learn how to hunt and be successful.
Yeah, so my name is Ki Tan. I hunted with my friends, pheasant hunted with my friends for many, many years. And I don't know anybody else that hunted big games. And later on, we decided to try. None of us know how to hunt, and none of us were successful. We tried it for a few years, and never was successful at firearm hunting. And Then we started on a Groupon thing.
Groupon. Back then, I don't know if you guys are aware of Groupons, but there was a Groupon for firearm, learning how to firearm and learning safety, firearm safety. And then there was an archery Groupon that I bought.
So she got a Groupon for trying a bow, and I never shot one before. So we decided to try it, and after I pulled that trigger, I was like, "Oh my God, this is great! We need to do this more." So we practiced a lot, and then it so happens my dad hit a deer with his car, and we had the option to take it home, so we did, and then we butchered it in the bathtub. And then we had the food. We made it some really good dishes out of it. It's like, we need to take some of these, and
but no more with the car. Okay, it has to be.
And so now we stop for deers now. And anyways, so that's why we started hunting, and because we really like the meat, and then we've been doing archery hunting simply because the season is so long, and you get to experience, 85 degrees going out in a t-shirt to 30 below going out basically in sleeping bags. And the deer behavior changes throughout the season, and you just so much variety. And that's why we really love archery hunting.
And just the last comment here is for those women. As a woman, I've hunted with a firearm before, and I can tell you, it's great. Firearm is great if you know your firearm safety. Going out there with firearm is great. However, what I don't like as a woman is the recoil, depending on what firearm you're using. Okay, it's a very powerful weapon, and the recoil scares the hell out of me still. So archery has been my passion. I would pick archery over firearm any day. And if I can do it, I guarantee you anybody can do it. It's all about practicing.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. I really really quick, I want to brag about Kim and Key because they came to this having never hunted before. They got up to speed. They did their own thing. They found a couple of folks that they could do it with. And really quickly, they've come back to teach the follow-ups behind them, the next cohort behind them. So thank you both for being involved in our programming. Thank you both for everything that you've done. Thank you both for being out there and helping us out with this stuff. So it's really awesome to see y'all making the next hunters after you. And that's something that I think we all, that's the ideal model, right? So thank you both. All right, let's get into the talk today. As always, I want to kind of go over a little bit of webinar housekeeping notes. This webinar is an overview of what's required to go deer hunting. It's a summary of deer ecology, hunting history, and how to hunt with a specific focus on Minnesota. I know we have folks tuning in. There's folks in Norway. We had somebody from New Zealand. We love having y'all on and watching this stuff, but a lot of this stuff is very Minnesota specific because we want folks getting out in Minnesota and getting on some deer. A big part of this is showcasing a variety of voices. As you can see, we've had a lot of special guests on here, and we're going to continue that. We have a lot of variety of who's doing it. We started off early with new hunters, and now we're progressing into our mentors, because hunting the way I hunt isn't how Kim and Key hunt. It's not how Craig hunts. And so there's a lot of variety in how you can do the stuff, and it's important for you as new hunters to hear that variety and adapt your own techniques as you move forward. This is a shortcut to help you get on the right path. There's a lot of information that's out there. We want you to get onto the right stuff so that you're not spending a lot of time engaging with material that may not be productive or helpful. And we definitely want you to please fill out our survey. As always, you know, I'm getting notes that my audio is a little low, so I'm fidgeting a bit. We want to know if what we're teaching you is good, is bad, if there's gaps, how it works, how this format works, so that we can evaluate it moving forward. If you have questions, please direct them to the Q&A. It's easier for us to navigate. As one of us is talking, the rest of us will be hanging out in the Q&A trying to address questions. If you have specific questions for Kim and Key, this is your one and only shot to engage with them. So please ask them questions. Please take advantage of the fact that they're here. Craig and I are always here. We'll always be there to answer your questions, but this is your only chance with Kim and Key. All right. There's another heads up. There's some more stuff coming out. If you've enjoyed this webinar and you've been enjoying learning about deer and deer hunting, there's more stuff coming out about chronic wasting disease. We talked about this a little bit in our third class with Kelsey Lashar. Please hit up the DNR webpage for chronic wasting disease, but there is also a webinar series coming up through the University of Minnesota on chronic wasting disease, and it's a 4-part series starting tomorrow. So if you have an interest in seeing that or engaging with it, just do a quick search for MNPRO CWD webinar, and it'll take you straight to the registration page, and you can check that out. So more information is going to be coming up as we get closer to the opener of firearms. More and more deer information is going to be coming out. You're going to be seeing it in the news. You'll be sometimes it'll be hard to get away from. So, all right. How do you select your spot? We've talked about online scouting. We've talked about scouting in the field. So what do you do to pick that one place that you're going to set up and hopefully go deer hunting? And it requires you putting together all of that information that you've done with your online scouting, with your on the ground scouting, to home in on that one particular spot. Because let's face it, if you go out to a wildlife management area or somebody's 400-acre farm, you know, that's still a lot of land for deer to be roaming around, and when you need them between 20 and 100 yards in front of you, right? So you really need to get into that spot. You really need to get them close. As we said earlier, really starting those pinch points and funnels, starting those landscape features that concentrate deer movement, and use those to inform you on getting on sign, getting on trails, and then following those trails to other areas that may be informative, like feeding areas or bedding areas, so that you can pick an ideal spot. Focus on those dedicated trails. You know, in the scouting talk we had last week, we talked about 2 different types of trails. We talked about dedicated trails and opportunistic trails. Focus on those dedicated trails, because that's where you know they're going to be going. You know, I used to, when I talk about hunting flippantly in southern Wisconsin, I said, you know, if you find a dedicated trail and you sit there long enough, a deer is going to walk by. You know, it might take 7 days, but it'll walk by eventually, because that trail doesn't make itself. And when they're really well used, it means that either there's a high frequency of travel on it, or there are a lot of deer traveling on it. So finding those trails, those dedicated trails, is really a great thing to start with. Trail cameras, these have come up in a couple of classes before. They can really help you inform your hunches, right? So you get into an area, you see trails, you see beds, you see feeding area, you see scat or feces, and you think, oh man, there's got to be 40 giant bucks roaming through here. And you know, you can set up a trail camera and you can see, well, it's not 40 bucks, it's 1 buck, and there's 20 does or fawns that are roaming around the area as well. So use those trail cameras to provide you information. They can collect information while you're not there, but there's a trade-off with trail cameras. You know, Carrie talked about this last week, where she said she kind of has a love-hate relationship with trail cams. They can provide you more information, but they can also kind of force you to forget there's an entire landscape out there. Like all of a sudden you're dedicated to just that spot that the trail cam's looking at, and you may overlook another area simply because that's not where the trail cam is. So use it as a tool, but don't become overly reliant on it. You also, if you're on public land, you know, you run the risk of somebody seeing that and taking it. So just be smart with how you apply it. And honestly, I don't use trail cams very often. That being said, when somebody has a trail cam, I definitely look at it. So I definitely use that to inform me. So it can be useful, but if you're just starting this and you're having questions about it, get out there for a season, maybe 2, before you invest in money on a trail cam, because it's nice to augment what you know, but it's not going to be creating knowledge that you couldn't already get. Kim and Key, do y'all use trail cams?
We hunt a lot of public land, so I can tell you that for many years we did not want to invest in trail cams because, again, you run the potential of somebody stealing it. But we once we were invited to more private land, we did invest in a couple of trail cams just to start out. But I agree that trail cams don't give you the full picture. It's nice to kind of use it as a way to pattern the deer movement. But really, hunting is about you got to be out there. Yeah, whether you harvest a deer or not, the more times you're out there in the woods and monitoring the area that you're going to be hunting, the more success you are at harvesting that deer eventually. And like you said, if there's a trail, somebody's using it. The deer is using it. Eventually, sit there. The deer will come.
Yep.
We do use trail cam for specific reasons to confirm our belief one way or the other. And a lot of the times I use the cameras just to see if the deer are coming in the mornings or in the afternoons. Because I know there's a trail, I know they're coming. I just want to know when, right? That's pretty much the limit of what a camera can do for me. Because you cannot do a 360 degrees, right? So, and you have very limited range. Today, deer may not go on this particular trail. You may, veered off 10 yards from there. But then, because it's not, trail camera didn't capture it, doesn't mean the deer wasn't there. So, like I said, I use it to just confirm what my beliefs are and then try to figure it out whether it's a morning hunt place or evening hunt place. But nothing replaces actual hunting. You have to be there.
Yep. Excellent. Thanks, y'all. So how do you pick this spot? And that process depends on a lot of factors. And a lot of the hunters that I know, and it doesn't matter if it's deer, pheasant, or duck, even if they've been doing it for years and years and years, there's always this tension, this math that they're doing as they're doing it in their head, and they're constantly second guessing themselves, like, oh, should I have gone on the other side of the ridge, or oh, should I have set up on the trail that goes more towards the apple orchard instead of the cornfield? And that's gonna be just part of the process, because you're never going to have the full picture of what's out there. But picking your spot, it's going to depend on the vegetation, it's going to depend on the topography, it's going to depend on the sun, it's going to depend on the wind, and it's going to depend on what you're using. And we're going to get into all of that right now. So vegetation can really make or break your spot. Can you see is a huge thing to be aware of. It may be the deeriest woods around, but if you've only got a 10-foot sight line, then it's probably not going to be that great of a spot to set up. Can you maneuver through it? And not only can you maneuver through it when you're scouting, but if you're taking additional gear out there, if you're taking a blind, if you're taking a stand, can you maneuver through it without making a ton of noise, especially if it's going to be in the dark, if it's going to be early? Corresponding to that, can you set up in it? Is there a lot of really crinkly leaves? Like that could be a real noise factory if you're trying to set up a blind in the early dawn. If you're a dedicated tree stand hunter and there's no stems that are big enough, if there's no trees that are big enough for your stand, or they're too big, that's not a good spot either. And then will you need shooting lanes? And shooting lanes are what you do when you actually trim vegetation to make it possible for you to take a shot. And that can be anything as innocuous as taking those pruners and kind of snipping off a few little twigs to make sure that your arrow doesn't get knocked and cause you to miss a shot. Or it could be mowing a path through thick woods to give you an opportunity to take a shot. And Craig, I want you to jump in on that, because I know that that's much more of an option on private land where you're at.
So I've actually rented heavy equipment with brush mowing attachments and mowed a 10-foot path, through a brushy area, and it offers great visibility. When hunting public land, like James said, just taking a pair of nippers and being a foot wide shooting lane, it doesn't give you a lot of opportunity to shoot, and you may have to make a simulated grunt to get that deer to stop in that little 1-foot shooting lane. But having visibility is very important, especially up here in the thick north woods.
Yep. And keep in mind, what Craig has, what he can do on his own private property is very different what you can do on public land. What you can do on public land depends on the type of public land it is. Please check the rules and regulations because they will tell you what you can and can't cut. Look at it and study it up, because what you can do on state forest land is different than what you can do on WMAs. So there's a patchwork of management recommendations that are out there. Check the rules and regs. Make sure you can cut stuff before you do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The types of vegetation can be very important. Minnesota's a big state. The woods that Craig deals with up north are different than what we've got down here in the metro. If it's really thick and brushy, young aspen or alder, thick brush like thick hazel thickets or buckthorn down here can be a huge issue. The deer may love it because it's really good cover and it's shelter for them, but you hunting, it's going to be a pain. You're not going to see very much. It's going to be hard to maneuver. Really try to focus on those more open forest areas, whether that's open conifers where you can get some decent shot sight lines in, or my favorite habitat is that oak savanna area. I love those big open oaks. I love having that savanna area in between them. It makes it for really easy sight lines. Plus, with those oaks being there, the deer are going to want to be there for acorns. So the types of vegetation that you're dealing with can really influence homing in on that specific spot. Topography is it's the lay of the land. Like, are you dealing with a flat area? Are you dealing with rolling hills? Are there ridges? Are there steep ravines or gullies? All of this goes into factoring how you're going to set up, how you're going to pick that one spot. If you're in an area with hills and valleys or gullies and ravines, keep in mind that you're out there to take a shot and put an animal on the ground. I don't want to set up in a spot where I've got to go drag a deer up a steep hillside, right? Like that's a lot of work. So keep that in mind as you're making these decisions. That flat terrain, it may be a lot more wide open, it may be a lot more visible, but you're going to have more to deal with countering wind effect, and you're going to be more visible as well. So those are trade-offs as you make this stuff coming into it, and it's important to keep that in mind as you go on. The sun is an important thing that a lot of us, if you're not accustomed to getting up at sunrise, you don't necessarily know how bright that thing can be right as it crests the horizon. Keep in mind that when you're out scouting, you're probably not scouting at dawn. So as you're picking these spots, try to make sure you're aware of where east is, because that's where the sun's going to be coming up, and you don't want to be facing into the sun as you shoot. You can do it, it's not impossible, but there's going to be about a 15-20 minute window there where that sun is just going to be so bright you don't want to be staring into it. Stuff is going to be backlit, so you're not going to have the best sight picture of it, and you may not know what's beyond your target as you're aiming. So please keep that in mind as you're setting up. Additionally, if you're sunlit and totally out in the open, your movement's going to be more visible. You're going to be easier to pick out as you do that stuff. So if you have the opportunity, try to make sure you cheat to the north. So try to keep that sun at your back. Us here in the northern hemisphere, we have the sun in the south to us. So try to face north when you can, because that'll always have the sun at your back. It's not always possible, but try to take that into account as you're setting up, because you'll regret it when you're staring straight into the oncoming sun and that wonderful deer steps out in front of you. If you're not comfortable picking out north and south. You make sure you take your compass when you scout, use that to factor into your decision. Play the wind. And, you know, we talked about how the nose is the deer's most powerful weapon, and that's what they're using when they're out there roaming around. As long as you keep that wind in your face, you're going to be okay. You know, no matter what happens, you know, upwind, downwind, if that's confusing, just keep the wind in your face. You're going to be okay. Use it to inform where you will sit. Check your weather applications or online forecasts for the wind direction and speed. You know, if you're just starting off on this, a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily know what direction the wind is coming from. So if somebody says it's a north wind, that means the wind is coming out of the north. If it's an east wind, it's coming out of the east. Wind in Minnesota typically comes from the northwest for most often, but that can shift rapidly, and especially as the deer season progresses, you know, that can mean that there's rain coming. And Craig, why don't you speak a little bit about that?
So over the paying really close attention to that open forecast. And most of my north and now weatherman, we're going to have winds out of the southwest, and it means changing tactics or potentially setting in a stand that's not going to be as productive. And the thing I've noticed too is that warmer southwest wind tends to bring precipitation, and if it's warmer weather, that means rain. A few extra setups. You can hunt in the rain. I would do it more with a gun than a bow, but you know, you have the potential of your sign being washed away when you're trying to track that deer down. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Kim and Key, how do y'all engage with the wind? Is it like a big part of your math, or is it a small part of your math?
So, so being me, I've heard lots of hunters talk about being downwind from a deer, and I had no idea what that meant. Like nobody really explained it to me. And even having the wind in your, I'm like, well, what does that mean? So for those that might not know, I don't want to embarrass anybody because I didn't know either. Is let's say you set up your tree stand on a trail. That trail should be in front of you. So you want that wind to be blowing from that trail to you, because when the deer cross, he's upwind from you, you are downwind from it. A deer has three ways of detecting if somebody's in the wood. Sense of smell is their best defense. Sight, but I think sight is the weakest. So sense of smell, they're hearing, and then sight is probably their least most effective. Okay? And if that's why I choose to hunt on a tree stand, because typically they won't look up. Typically, we say that. But their sense of smell is really good. So you want to play the wind, but sometimes you choose a location and it's too late to move and you can't play the wind. But you try. You try your best to play the wind. What about you?
Go ahead, Key.
So I like to hunt in when it's windy. At 10, 15, 25, that's the kind of when I like to go out. Usually that means I don't need to worry about the direction of the wind. It's strong enough where it blows my scent all over the place. So I am not very good at it. And so I know that. So therefore, when it's windy, I'm like, yes, let's get out there. Other people may not like it as much, but that's what's been working for me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, when you've got the wind, you know, I've definitely set up in places where I didn't like the wind direction, yet that's where all the deer sign was, right? So I've come to a field corner and the wind's been coming out of the north, and I wanted to be on the south side of the field so that the wind would be blowing in my face. The field would be in front of me. Yet all the deer sign was on the north side of the field. So I had to set up there anyway. And it's just one of those things that it's something to be aware of. If it's one of those things that for me, if I can account for it, I do. But if I can't, you just got to make it work. And sometimes you can't control all the factors that are out there. So how close do you get? That's going to depend as well. So there's a lot of math that you're doing when you're out there, and I'm saying that because I want people to be tracking on it, but I don't want it to be overwhelming because it really isn't. It's just about being careful, right? You just have to account for where you're going and how you're doing it. How close do you get depends on your shooting ability. How far can you shoot? How far are you comfortable making an ethical shot? What you're shooting, what other gear you're carrying or using, and how pressured the deer are. And we'll get into what deer pressure is. A little distance goes a long way. If you can set up a little farther away from that specific spot, if there's a trail intersection and there's scrapes and rubs and poop and all sorts of stuff and giant neon signs flashing, there are deer here, that's the spot you want to set up on. If you can set up a little farther away from it than being right on top of it, that usually gives you a little more options. It lets you get away with more movement so that the deer don't see you. It keeps that scent farther away from the deer as they're hitting that spot. And it lets you be a little less rigid. You don't have to sit stone still as that deer is coming in. You can kind of, as they're going behind trees or as they're going behind other obstacles, you can pull your gun up or you can draw your bow back. So setting up a little farther away is often a good thing to do because it lets you get away with some stuff. And by stuff, I mean movement. It depends on your shooting ability. You need to know your limits. We've said it every webinar. This webinar is not a substitute for you being out in the field. It is not a substitute for you being at the range, getting comfortable with your method of take. You need to know how far you can shoot and stick to that. And, when you're at the range, start at shorter distances. If you're shooting a bow, start at 10 yards. If you're shooting a firearm, start at 25 yards. And a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the vital areas of a deer are about the size of a basketball. So if you've got that image in your head of what a basketball sized object is, keep your shots within that basketball size. And as you back up, if those shots start to go beyond that basketball size, that's your maximum limit. Go back to where you were keeping those shots consistently within the basketball, and that's your maximum limit. So start close, start off early, and get comfortable, and then find out where that limit is and stay within it. For most archers, they keep it within 30 yards. A lot of them keep it within 20. For firearms, especially here in eastern Minnesota, 100 yards is a long shot unless you're shooting over a cut field. So know your limits, stick to them, and you'll be all right. How close you set up depends on what you're shooting. So for most bows that are out there, like we just said, it's about 30 yards. If you're shooting a smooth bore shotgun with open sights, it's just got the bead on it. If you're good and you practice, you might get out to 50, 60 yards. Beyond that, that projectile is going to drop really quick. It's going to be hard to get on target with it. Those shotguns that have rifled barrels and scopes, and you're using Sabo ammunition that's specifically designed to put a spin on that projectile, that's going to give you that's going to get you out to 75, maybe 100 yards as a fairly new shooter. A rifle with iron sights, so just the fixed sights, not a scope, you might get, depending on how good your eyes are, you might get 100, 120 yards. And then, if you've got a rifle that's got a good quality scope on it, it's going to depend on the scope, it's going to depend on the ammunition, but you can do 100 to 300 yards as long as you practice and you're comfortable at that distance. So there are a lot of shooters who have rifles that are better than they are, right? Like that rifle could shoot 400, 500, 600 yards if they practiced really hard and got really comfortable with it. but that person's only going to take a 100-yard shot because that's what they've practiced to. So know what you're shooting, know where your limits are, and stick to those limits, and that will inform you how close you can get. It depends on the gear that you're using. Whoops, excuse me. Come on, computer. It depends on the gear that you're using. So if you're using stands or blinds, that's going to affect how close you set up to that spot. You know, if you're using a blind, maybe you can cheat a little closer because you're going to be able to get away with a lot of movement and the deer aren't going to see you. If you're using stands like Kim and Key are using when they're talking about their archery shooting, maybe you can get a little closer because like Kim said, it gets you up out of their sight radius. They're, you know, deer, the main predators for deer are terrestrial predators, right? Like we don't have any giant raptors that are swooping down out of the trees to take them. So they're focused on what's on the ground. So if you're above that sight line, you know, you've got an advantage and you don't have to be that high. You know, the deer that I usually shoot with a bow, my butt is maybe 15 feet off the ground. So you don't have to be super high in the trees. You just have to be above where where their heads usually are, so that you can get above where they're looking and you can get your scent above where their nose is. Those temporary tree stands, you know, you can still be visible and deer will see you and they will, it's called being busted. You know, they will look straight at you and it's like they're staring into your soul and then they'll walk out of your life and you'll feel a little worse about yourself. But when they don't see you, it's really awesome. You know, a fixed stand like is pictured on that right picture. You know, that's a great, if you're on private land or you have permission to construct them, they're fantastic. They can be super comfortable. They can have power. They can, you know, it's you know, the Taj Mahal in the woods. But not everybody has access to those and they keep you to one spot. You know, you can't move that thing around. You can't put that thing on your back and move it around. So keep that in mind. The blinds, if you're using a blind, you know, they totally hide your movement, and they're usually quicker to set up than a tree stand. When I go out bow hunting and I have my tree stand, I usually add an additional 30 to 40 minutes for my setup. With a blind, it's maybe 5-10 minutes. The trade-off with the blind is that it still keeps you on the ground. You maybe not be able to see over the vegetation that's around you. For me personally, I feel confined and constricted in them, so I'm not as big of a fan of them, but they do the job, especially if you're a fidgety person and maybe sitting still isn't your thing, totally fine. There's a range of blinds that are out there, and we're going to do a deep dive into stands and blinds on Thursday, but this is just a quick overview. How pressured are the deer? And deer pressure means like how wary are they? Like how specifically when you talk about deer pressure, it's how much hunting pressure are on those deer. Are they constantly being chased by hunters? If so, they're going to be associating that human scent with a negative response, and they're going to be a lot less willing to let you get close. You know, there are deer at Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge here in the metro that I can get within 20 yards of, and they do not bat an eyelash because they don't associate human scent with that threat. There are deer in the North Woods that I can't get within 100 yards of because the second they smell me, they are out of there. And when I see them, it's usually their back end as they're like fleeing through the trees. So deer pressure, you know, the hunting pressure on a deer can affect how close you set up on a spot. If it's a really pressured spot, back off a little bit, give them a little bit more room. If it's not a really pressured spot, maybe you don't have to worry about it so much. The other thing there with scent and people, areas with fewer people typically equate to more wary deer. So that human scent is not something that they're accustomed to. They're going to be a little bit more nervous about it. They smell something different in the woods that's going to set them on edge. You know, in southern Minnesota and most of Wisconsin, there's not a deer around that doesn't know what people smell like. And frequently they're going to associate those people with food, whether it's agriculture, whether it's bird food, whether bird seed, or whether it's literally people feeding them in their backyard. So, you know, it depends. It depends on how many people are in those areas. It depends on what's happening in those areas. But if they're really pressured, back off. And if you don't know, be conservative about it. If you don't know how pressured that area is, give them a little bit more space because it's always, you can always get closer if you're good and quiet. You can't always back up. So the second you're busted, that's it. And that's not saying another deer's not going to come along in a little bit, but you need to be aware of that and make sure that you're giving them space to come in so that you can get a shot off. As you adjust, I'm going to go over adjusting tactics through the season because I want to get into Key and Kim's process. You know, as the season progresses, keep track of multiple factors, keep track of the weather, keep track of the length of the day, keep track of the rut, the land and what it's doing, and the gear that you've got. You know, the weather is going to be changing on a day-to-day pattern. You know, when it's warmer out there, focus on water and hunt early and later in the day because the deer are going to be wanting to get shelter and get out of the sun. Colder temperatures, I focus on food right away, food resources first thing, and then trails leading to bedding a little later. So if I set up on a food resource and I don't get something coming in, I'll set up on a trail that is leading more towards bedding area because they're going to want to be getting calories first thing in the morning to stay warm. And then as soon as their bellies are full, they're going to want to go and hunker down and just kind of digest. Deer tend to be active after storms. We talked about scrapes and rubs. Those bucks are going to be wanting to freshen up their scrapes. And does and fawns are also going to be wanting to move around and eat, as well as find maybe a drier spot. And if a cold front is moving through, look for that thick cover or getting on the leeward side of ridges. So the side of the ridge, leeward is the side opposite of the wind is blowing. So if the wind is coming out of the north, try to get on that south side of the ridge because that's where there's going to be shelter. It's going to be warmer. Day length changes deer behavior. Those change patterns are more of a week to week. It's not a daily sort of thing. Those shorter days trigger hormone patterns. They correspond to colder temperatures. And as the days shorten, look for that dense vegetation where they can find cover. And not necessarily to hunt in that dense vegetation, but find the trails that are leading to that dense vegetation and going to and from that cover so that you can get them as they're coming or going. The rut, you know, we talked a little bit about this in the first class. This is the mating season for the deer. Up here, it's typically around the 3 weeks from the end of October to the middle of November. So it's right during that firearm season. In Wisconsin, the firearm season's later. So the archers always are talking about the rut because they get to hunt it and the firearm shooters don't get to hunt it. The males are going to be less cautious. They're going to be moving around much more during midday. You're going to have bucks chasing does. You're going to have bucks fighting other bucks. And, you know, it's just, they're not thinking about human scent as much. They're not thinking about their normal feeding patterns. All they're thinking about is finding females and fighting other males. So they can be it can be really easier to find them. Beware of lockdown bucks. And by lockdown, we mean if there's a doe that's close to breeding, that buck is going to be on her tight and he's not going to want to move. So he may not be moving around very much. You may not know that until you see a doe walking and there's just a buck stuck to her tail, just sniffing the entire way that she goes. So be aware of that. You know, you may not have much control over that, but if you see a buck in the area and he's just not moving and he's really just hunkered down, that's probably what's happening. Deer respond to changing patterns on the land. As crops are harvested, deer are going to change those patterns. When the crops are up, I focus on trails leading to the fields, but when they come down, I'm going to be right on those field edges because those deer are going to they're going to want to be close to that edge. When the crops are up, if the deer are in the field, I can't see them. So specifically corn. So I want to get them as they're going to it. But when that corn gets harvested, I'm right on the edge because A, I can see them, but B, they're going to want to still be closer to those trees because if there's a threat, that's where they're going to go. As the leaves drop and fall progresses, you know, your shooting areas and visibility in the woods may change. Keep that in mind when you're scouting areas. And as water freezes up, running water becomes more important. Now there's kind of a sweet spot here where water's freezing up and there's not a whole lot of snow on the ground. And then there's a lot of snow on the ground and they can get water that way. So keep that in mind, use it as a resource. If you've got a spot where there's running water and everything else is frozen, I'd really focus on that. Your gear is going to change as the season progresses. You know, your gear will be able to keep you out longer. And the longer you're out, the more chances you have. But, you know, it doesn't take much to get cold, especially if you're sitting in a tree stand. You know, if you're sitting in a tree stand and it's 40 degrees and you just have wind in your face the entire time, that gets cold. And it gets cold pretty quick. So dress appropriately. know your limits with this stuff too. You know, if your gear, you know, if you're losing feeling in your fingers and toes, get up, walk around. You know, this isn't, you don't need to prove how tough you are for deer hunting. Like this is, you're supposed to be enjoying it. So pay attention to your body, pay attention to what you feeling like. If nothing else, a foam seat pad can really go a long way towards increasing your comfort because A, it's more comfortable to sit on, but B, it also increases your insulation from cold ground. And with that, I want to turn it over to Kim and Key to talk about their process. How do they do this stuff? What do you, so Kim and Key, what do you do as the season progresses? Like what's the math that you're doing as you do this stuff?
You know, we're mainly bow hunters. So we have a long season. It starts like mid-September, ends on December 31st. So typically in the early seasons, depending on the weather, but typically we go right to ag land because the deer will be out trying to, you know, fatten up for the winter. So they're going to be hitting ag land, and ag land won't be around for very long because they'll get harvested. So we need to make sure that we get on ag land first. That's typically our strategy. And there are different crops depending on the crop also on that ag land. Like we would choose soy over corn any day. But also depends on like what stage the soy is in, the soybeans are in. Like when the soybean is green, oh, perfect. The deer love green soybeans because they love that tender, they'll browse on those tender little shoots that come out. But if it's yellow, yeah, for some reason, we've noticed that, and we could be totally wrong because, you know, but from our experience, they don't seem to like the yellow stuff. But when it's brown, it's close to ready for harvesting. The deer love that stuff, and
Like
we'll be out there.
Like the state of the soybean in that picture that you're showing, that, you know, deer will be hitting that really hard.
Yeah.
And typically when the season opens, we have maybe 2 weeks of green leaves, and then after that they turn yellow, and then we'll leave it alone for about 2 weeks. We come back, and when that bean is brown like that, we'll be hunting that really close. Even like a week after it's harvested, you can still hunt that because deer will still come back and paw through all of the droppings and all that sort of thing. So you're good for, you know, for a long time until that until this thing is no longer pickable. Then they will start changing their feeding patterns.
Yeah, and then corn. I mean, we don't typically like to hunt over corn because there's a potential risk that when you hunt over corn, you shoot that deer and it'll run into the corn and it will disappear. Same with swampland. We're not a huge fan of swampland either because if you hit that deer, it'll run in there and bed down and you've lost that blood trail. But the nice thing we like about corn is when it's being harvested, when they're out there combining the corn, they're going to push the deer out to you. So we and as bow hunters, we need to be close to our deer, as close as possible, but you know, not where they can detect us. So typically about 10 yards away from the trail that we think the deer is taking. Over ag land will be like in the woods, just a little bit, maybe 10 yards in the woods. My deer came out, that picture was just taken 2 days ago, and he came out at 7 yards from me, right in front of me. So you want to be in cover, you know, near ag land, and being on those edges is going to help you when they're combining the corn. They're going to flush those deer towards, because you're like cover, so they're going to flush those deer right into the cover where you're sitting.
So we will hunt right on the edge of bean fields. And as far as if it's corn, will be like what Jim was saying, I will hunt further away. I want to hunt them as they're going into corn rather than on the edge. Because if you shoot that deer, is going to disappear in the corn. It's very difficult to find them. But if they're in the beans and you shoot them, it's really easy to pick them up. So that's when we're hunting eggland. As the season progresses, they start combining and all that sort of thing. Then we will start hunting the travel corridors, because the lands that the egg area that we hunt, you have miles and miles of corn. They can travel ever direction, any time of the day, and the travel corridors are not as useful at that point. But as they combine the area, the travel area, the options for them to travel is starting to reduce. They will start picking up the travel corridors, and that is a lot more effective. When even if you have half the corn still standing, the travel corridor is a lot more useful at that point. And then once by the time rut come around, majority of the time the corn will be down already. They'll be harvested already. So the travel corridor is what you're relying on. Pinch points and all that sort of really come to play. Then this is, as the season progresses, we change our hunting locations quite drastically, because the field of the edge is no longer productive once a couple of weeks after it's being harvested.
Now you're looking for different types of food sources like oats,
Yeah.
turnips,
Yeah.
alfalfa, and clover. Those are still productive later in the season. So early season is like soybeans, apples, and then mid-season, I'd say corn, because you know that they're going to get pushed out from the corn. Then late season, it's turnips, alfalfa, clover, oats. Are typically our late season spots that we look for.
Because we're bow hunters, so during a rut we generally don't hunt. So that's not that's an area of expertise you need to ask somebody else.
But I can tell you, I mean, I love the fact that there is a firearm season, because I hunt right before fire. I go out there every single day right before firearm season, because those deer are going to be moving around, because there's hunters in the woods and they're going to flush out those deer to you. And I think that's like pre-rut right there. And they're going to go nuts, and they're going to come out. They're not going to be paying attention, and bam.
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah, that's really awesome, y'all. I mean, it's one of those things that, we talk about the rut, but the pre-rut, that period right before the rut kicks in hardcore, that also triggers a lot of movement, because that's when the males, during the rut, the males are fighting and they're chasing does, but that pre-rut, they're really trying to find the does, right? And they're really trying to find the other males. So there's a little bit of a warm-up period to that rut moving into it. So that's awesome that you're tracking on that.
And just one last tip, James, that I give hunters who have that don't have a lot of time. It's hard when you work, and then you only have certain days out of the year to hunt. My one tip that I've learned is, if there's a drastic temperature change between the days, that's the best time to go out. I mean, we save all of our work vacation, our PTO, for the hunting season. We will go out, because we don't own our own land. We hunt mainly public land. We will go out on odd days where there are less hunters out there. And so we save all of our PTO just to go on those odd weekdays and be out in those properties.
Nice. So thanks, Kim and Key, for walking us through that process. It's really awesome to hear that perspective as more dedicated bow hunters, because I think with a lot of new folks, when you come to hunting and you see the imagery of hunting, a lot of times it's just, well, I need private land, and I have to build a blind, and I have to do all this stuff, and you don't necessarily. You can. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this stuff. So it's really valuable to have that bow hunter perspective. As Key said, it's a lot longer season. You get to see the woods completely shift from late summer to the dead of winter. So it's a really kind of rewarding time to be out in the woods and watch that process happen. We are closing in on our time, so if there are questions, please, now's the time to ask them. If you've got stuff to ask, if you've got stuff specifically for Kim and Key, again, this is our only time with them for this webinar series, so please hit that up. If you have other more general questions, please let us know. We've had a few. Craig's been busy in the Q&A answering stuff, so and I saw Kim as well was in there, so please reach out if you've got questions and we can deal with them. As we do the questions, we'll try to do these verbally so that we can get through more of them. So Craig and Kim and Key, temperature change, is it better when it gets warmer or colder? And I would, as
Colder.
with a lot of stuff, it depends, but the colder is going to move them around more. Kim and Key, what do you guys think?
Absolutely agree.
So in general, you were thinking, deer has this nice fur coat on them, right? So if you're wearing a fur coat and it's 40 degrees, you can walk around relatively comfortable. And then next thing you know, that the temperature goes up by 20 degrees. All of a sudden, you're walking around in a fur coat in 60-degree weather. You're not going to walk as much. You're not going to move a whole lot. And that's how I look at it. So you have a 40-degree temperature. It all of a sudden dropped to 20. You're able to it's colder, so you need to move around a little bit more to get some heat going. And it's just more comfortable walking around with a thick coat on when it's 40 degrees versus 80 degrees. So for me, temperature drop works. That's how I think about it.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that colder weather, it takes for a warm-blooded animal, you've got to eat food to keep that furnace going. So as it gets colder, those deer are going to be looking for more food resources moving around. Kim and Key, there are a couple of questions I want y'all to answer. One is, what are some barriers to you all when you started hunting and how did you address them? And then the other question is, when you're hunting on public land, do you find success on one-day hunts at a time, or do you have to stay for multiple days at a time?
I think your strategy, my husband's strategy is always to really know the spot that you're hunting, understand it. You really have to hunt it 3 times in a row. Because you don't know if the deer are moving, and we don't put cameras out on public land, but you don't know if the deer is moving in the morning or if that spot is good for evening. So you really have to have patience and be out in the woods in that same spot, and don't get discouraged. Be in that same spot for 3 times in a row to really get a feel of, hey, am I seeing anything? And even if you don't see anything while you're there, if you check the trail that you're anticipating the deer is on, do you see new prints? Do you see new scat? Things like that. Or follow that trail. Oh, there might be a new scrape there that day. But typically we like to, you really have to have patience and hunt that spot. Don't be like, oh, I see a deer over there, I'm going to start moving right away. No, you move, the deer might move beyond the old stand, so really have the patience to stick with the stand that you have and the spot that you have. And what was the other question, James? The first one?
What were some of the
barriers
to when you started, and how did you address them?
Well, the biggest barrier we had was this access to land, right? If you don't have private land and you don't know anybody and will give you the permission to hunt on their land, then you're pretty much stuck with hunting public land. And hunting public land is especially the ones that's close to the metro area, you will have a lot more pressure on the limited resources. So you really have to kind of look an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of the cities for hunting opportunities. And it's very difficult for a person who's working to be able to go out that far on a weekday, to be able to scout during the year. It's easier, but to hunt on on days like that, it's very difficult to manage. It just so happens, so, you know, our jobs are flexible enough where we can do that. But for majority of the people, that is I think that's the most challenging part of hunting public land is trying to find access.
Yeah.
So that's why you got to be conscious of picking your days and when you want to come out. Like I said, we save all of our PTO for, not for vacations, but for hunting. And like you see the drastic temperature drop, 10-degree drop between days. Oh my God, gotta be out there. You should be out there. The deer are going to be moving because they like that cold front coming in. And I think for my husband, his main barrier was there was really no program for an adult man to learn to hunt. Back when we were starting out. So that's probably why he enrolled me in a woman's hunting program. So I would come home and teach him. So then when we learned about your program, James, it incorporates women and men. We were like, yeah, this is the kind of program we want to be involved in, and so that we can show, there's opportunities for an adult male who's never had any experience in hunting, no background in, no family background in hunting, to be able to learn how to hunt, and same with a female. Those were our barriers.
Nice, very nice. We are at 1 o'clock. We're actually just past it, 1:01. If you've got to duck off the call, that is fine. We're going to stick around for a couple more minutes and make sure that we get all our questions answered. So I just want to give everybody a heads up that we're just past 1. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're going to hang on and make sure we get our questions answered. If you have more questions, please hit us up and we'll get through it. So thanks so much for tuning in. And let me see, there's a question in here. Uh-oh. All right, I want to make sure that everybody's ready to go. Let me see. So, can you take a deer from 2 different 1 deer limit areas? Craig, you want to answer that one?
No, your main license would allow you to take that 1 deer from a 1 deer area, an intensive harvest or a managed area that you could go and hunt, and the second deer would have to be antlerless.
Right. So
frame license is good for buck or doe. Second deer special harvest area.
Yeah, so if those areas are a 1 deer limit area, you're restricted to that main license tag that you buy and you sign. So you're restricted to 1 deer for those areas. If you can, but you could take 1 deer from a 1 deer limit area and then go to a 2 deer or a 3 deer or an unlimited and use bonus tags in those areas. So that would be your way to get more than 1 deer. Let me see. I think
that's it
right now. Those are the questions that are there. So yeah. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, Kim and Keith, so much for taking the time out of your day to help us with this. It's tremendous to have you online. I love talking with y'all. I love hearing your voices. Thank you so much. And we are going to be back on Thursday at noon. We're going to be talking about stands and blinds and how do you make, how do you make the decision to shoot, to not shoot, and we'll be going from there. So please tune in. Please hit our survey. Please let us know how we're doing. And we'll see everybody on Thursday. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Get out in the woods, go look for some deer sign, and get out on the range and get practicing. So, all right, everybody. Have a good day, and bye now.